All right, guys, let's talk Dune Prophecy episode 4. We are almost there with the end of Dune Prophecy. We are 2/3 of the way through the show, and so we are here to talk about the 4th episode. This is going to be a full spoiler discussion for Dune Prophecy. If you have not seen the 4th episode, make sure to save this podcast, this episode, this video, whatever format you're watching on, just save it for later and then come back to it once you have. But for those of you who have seen Dune Prophecy or don't care about spoilers, I've been stalling a little bit just to give you some time, but let's get into Dune Prophecy. I always like to start out these segments, just in case you're new to the channel and you haven't caught up with my previous spoiler discussions for Dune Prophecy, just some of my quick thoughts about how I thought about the previous 3 episodes. So episode 1, I really liked. I thought they were setting up a world that was interesting, obviously within the Dune world. And yes, it was dense. And for sure, it's not a show that's for everyone, as I said in episode 2. But I think the first 2 episodes encapsulated some of the strengths really well of this Dune world, which is that it's a little bit slow, a little bit mechanical. It's starting to get things in motion and get all the characters in the right places, and starting to set up the lore with the sandworms and with Desmond Hart and all these different things with the sisterhood. But it's kind of a slow burn, and it's not for everyone in terms of just being invested in the Dune lore. So I totally understood that. Episode 3, though, was the first time where I kind of took a step back and said, oh, there are some significant problems with the show that are now just showing on a story kind of level, not just a Dune level. And so I think the pacing of episode 3 was all over the place, although I think at the end it sort of pulled itself together. And there were some interesting parts for sure. I think the Tula and Ori Atreides storyline was quite interesting, and the ending with Lila was also interesting. And, I think there are some interesting things going on, but because episode 3 was the halfway point of the series, it just didn't feel like we're officially now entering the downhill part where we're going to barrel towards the climax here. It just felt like more like episode 3 out of an 8 episode storyline, if that makes sense. Just like, the other HBO shows like The Penguin, for example, or even Rings of Power. So I think those shows were paced a little bit better, but I digress. We head into episode 4 here, and I was very interested to see what was going on with the storylines that we didn't really pick up on in the last episode, because the last episode was more dedicated to being a flashback. So let's get into it here. We're going to go through a play-by-play a little bit, and then I'll talk about my overall thoughts at the end again. So we start out here with a little bit of a dream sequence. We're following this sister that we've been seeing on and off throughout the show, and it's sort of like a ghost Bene Gesserit. She's seeing a Bene Gesserit sister walk through the halls, and then she basically sees the sister dying, and then she wakes up, and basically all the sisters are having bad dreams, weird sandworm kind of visions, just like how Raquella was having that prophecy vision, which is interesting. Then we cut back to Valia, and we've confirmed that this old guy is Valia's uncle, and the younger man is Valia's nephew, and so she is basically she's trying to engineer a plot between the two, or the family members rather, and trying to get them into a place with the High Council so then she can do all these different things. It starts to get a little bit complicated, but honestly, this is one of the more interesting things, I think, about this show. The more political intrigue kind of parts. And it's also interesting that, she's being accused of abandoning the Harkonnens, but is now finally going to, give them a higher position as by her becoming their truthsayer. But obviously this is all manipulation, and she is able to really tap into the fact that Harrow Harkonnen, that's the nephew's name, I believe, has a big inferiority complex, and so she's able to tap into that for her own gain. We also finally get back to Inez. I think it's a little disappointing, because I think Inez was a character that I thought had so much potential. I thought this show was actually going to center around her mostly, and then we kind of ditched her after halfway through episode 2, and we're finally getting back to her, although she doesn't really have a lot to do in this episode either, but we're getting back to her as well. And they're all, the family is all out there having lunch or something, and Desmond has a seat at the table just like he's a family member. Very creepy. It's he is really holding his family hostage. He's gaslighting Emperor Carino into basically currying favor for him while he does whatever he wants to do for Shai Hulud or whatever he's doing. And that's, I'll say it right now, and we'll talk about this repeatedly throughout this episode, because this was something that I was thinking about throughout the entire episode, is that there's one question that I have. There's one big question that I have that, honestly, unless they tie it together at the very end in some crazy way that's like, oh, it all makes sense, and et cetera, I need to know at this point who Desmond Hart is and what his deal is. Because honestly, at this point, we've been dragging it out for way too long, and I get it. Like, finally, we're sending the blood sample to Tula, which I kind of thought, okay, the episode might end with, this whole thing, and, turning out that way where we find out who Desmond Hart is or whatever. Okay, fine. But I also kind of suspected as well that they're just probably going to save it for the end of the episode that comes right before the finale or whatever. And truthfully, it's fine that Desmond Hart is doing all these things and being a mysterious character, and Shai Hulud, which is the sandworm god or whatever. It's all these different things that are going on. But at this point, not knowing more about Desmond Hart is infuriating to me. It's like we need to know something about this character, because at this point he's just doing things and we're not getting explanations for it, because I think the show thinks that this mystery is so much more fascinating than it actually is. And I'm not saying it's not interesting. I think he's a really interesting character for sure. I just think we need to know more about him at this point. So anyways, there is that. And then we get more scenes with Tula and the older woman sister at One Wallach 9. And I don't know, I kind of feel like there are some ulterior motives with this sister. She's really trying to downplay everything that Tula's doing. But then again, maybe she really just is concerned about Tula and she just thinks that whatever's going on is crazy, because it is kind of crazy. The drawing scene later is pretty crazy. So yeah, we'll see about that. So then we cut back to the High Council, and I'll talk about the High Council of Lanzarad, but also just wanted to point out the space shots continue to be beautiful. There are some space shots of ships leaving this, the kind of tube-shaped ships, if that makes sense. And I think that those are still really, really cool. So, okay, but let's talk about this new thing that's going on here, the High Council of Lanzarad, because I kind of felt like, throughout this episode, there was a middle chunk of this show that was just missing, because this whole High Council of Lanzarad thing, I don't think was really brought up before in the show. Maybe it was here and there and I just totally missed it, but all of a sudden this High Council thing is such a big deal, and it really does feel like 1 or 2 episodes were just completely missing from the show, which is so odd, because it felt so important that we needed to build up to this High Council scene, because I said in my immediate reaction that the High Council scene is one of the most interesting tension-filled scenes of the entire show. I thought it was great because all these different storylines are coming together. You have Kieran Atreides, you have the Constantine and Inez, trying to out Desmond Hart, and you have Desmond Hart there, and you have also Valia Harkonnen is there. So all these different storylines are coming together, and that sequence in isolation was so good, really good. But the build-up leading to it was almost non-existent, and I was just sitting there going, where did this come from? And now all of a sudden we're talking about this High Council. So it's this weird thing of, things in isolation in Dune Prophecy are most generally very good. It's just that the pacing at this point has gotten all sorts of wacky, and it doesn't feel like a lot of things are earned, if that makes sense. But anyways, we'll get to that in just a little bit. First, we have more Desmond Hart. It's I like the character. I just wish we knew more about him. I like the actor who's playing him. But he says, use me to Carino, but it's ironic because he is basically using Carino. For what end? I have no idea. Sandworm wants to rule the world? I don't know. I really don't know. We need to find out more about his backstory in episode 5, because it's already too late, honestly. Anyways, we also get back to this rebellion subplot with Kieran Atreides, something that also doesn't really get a whole lot of screen time at this point, honestly. They're buying a thinking machine. I don't know. Somewhat interesting, I guess, but anyways, we're building towards this High Council scene, though, in this episode, and I do think it is really cool to see all the Bene Gesserit, exercising their influence across the Imperium. I think that seeing the different Bene Gesserit sisters talking to the different leaders of the houses and influencing them, I thought that was actually quite an interesting touch, and it's cool to see that they have such influence across the Imperium as well. Also, the guy, I want to give kudos, the guy who's playing the young Baron Harkonnen, obviously not Vladimir Harkonnen, the Harrow Harkonnen, really good job, because he has this meeting with the other members of the houses, and it's a good job of showing how just incompetent he is, but also nervous, and he's really young. So I think that all that was portrayed really, really well. And then we get back to Wallach 9, and so these girls are now having dreams of Shai Hulud, who is the sandworm, and then Tula's trying to find out what's going on, so she makes them draw, basically, and it's a scary scene, actually, the way that they're drawing, the sandworm at first, and then they draw these eyes, and I guess later on, they describe these eyes as some kind of god or something that's watching them. And I don't know Dune lore well enough to know what's going on here, but is there some kind of god being that is behind? Is that Shai Hulud or Shai Hulud? I thought Shai Hulud was the sandworm. I could be totally wrong. I don't know what's going on here. It feels like a little bit too little too late, because, what are we setting up here that is going to pay off at the end of this series? I don't know. These storylines feel like they're in such isolation, but I wonder if they're going to all come together at the very end as well, because Wallach 9 feels so separate from whatever is going on with the palace. So there is that. The queen then comes and talks with Desmond Hart, and she basically says she's the one who leaked the fact that the boy was murdered. Again, I don't really know what this does for the story, but whatever. Also, another reminder, your friendly reminder, that we know nothing about Desmond Hart, so it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really make sense. We get back to Inez and Kieran, and look, I think that Inez could have been such an interesting character, and so could Kieran Atreides could have been also a really interesting character, but their storylines feel so weak, and they feel like they were left behind almost, which is such a weird thing to say, because I really thought these two characters were interesting, and then they just got left behind. Also, speaking of Left Behind, we get this notion here, again, maybe something that was brought up in an earlier episode that I totally missed over, but Theodosia, the other sister who is with Reverend or Mother Superior Valia Harkonnen, apparently has this superpower that Valia Harkonnen wants to use as a kind of nuclear deterrent. What is it? I have no idea. No idea. Like, there are a lot of these things in the show where if it was an episode 2 or an episode 1, I'd be like, okay, don't really know, but we're willing to go with it. It's episode 4 out of 6, and I don't know. I'm not resigning myself to saying we're just never going to know, or we're just going to be told the answer and then move on, but that's probably what's going to happen, and I feel like I'm just resigned to it anyways. But then we get to the High Council scene, and I didn't take many notes here because honestly this whole sequence was so tense that I was just in it. I was locked in. Everyone was here, and it's sort of a kudos where it's due because this scene had so much tension, intrigue, different characters were moving around, and Desmond was trying to turn the whole court into a dictatorship basically, and he's trying to really gain power for himself, through the Carinos. And this scene, it didn't feel earned in the grand scheme of the story, but the drama in the scene and the death of all of those houses, the heads of the houses, was brutal. And I thought that it was really, really well done. Still have no idea how he did that. But, there's that. We're getting hints, I guess, towards, they're going to try to find an answer because I guess they're sending the blood to Tula. So I suppose that's going to be an answer. Is it going to be a big reveal? I don't know who he could be, but whatever. I guess we'll find that out. It's really the question that I think should have been answered 2 episodes ago and is now just being held up in the air, kind of carrot on a stick kind of vibes. And we'll see about that. So then we get back to Wallach 9. And Tula is starting to have these visions as well. And Lila escapes. It's a very creepy scene. I wonder what happened there. I'm sure we're going to find some more answers. But it feels like, again, the show is just raising way more questions than it has answers. And it needs some answers at this point, because we're heading towards the end of this first season, if in fact it is our first season. Then we get a confrontation between Valia and her uncle. The uncle just kind of dies, kind of random. And then she basically employs a shapeshifter, which I do think shapeshifters are in the Dune lore, the Dune canon. So I'm not too upset about that. It's just another random thing that's kind of thrown in there. And we have 2 episodes left to tie up all these random things that are happening. And I don't know if the show can do it, guys. I really don't know. I'd like to think the show could do it, but I have hope that the last 2 episodes are at least going to be satisfying in terms of what the scope of this show is. But at this point, no matter what happens in the last 2 episodes, this show was bumpy and it had its really big promises of potential. And then it also had just moments where it was faltering. And I don't know what to make of the show in that regard, but I hope that, hopefully we can stick the landing. And also the other thing about this series is that, some series like the Penguin, for example, or even Agatha All Along in certain points, they have cliffhangers at the end of their episodes that make you go, oh, okay, I really want to, click on the next episode. Stranger Things, I think, is a master at these cliffhangers where at the end of the episode you go, oh, I really need to know what happens next. This show ends their episodes with cliffhangers that confuse you so much that you're like, I guess I should watch more because I have no idea what's going on. Which honestly, in the grand scheme of things, I don't think is a great way to end your episodes, but it is what it is because, I don't know, I guess that's one way to bring your audience back. So anyways, those were my spoilery thoughts on Dune Prophecy Episode 4. Look, I don't hate the show. I don't even dislike the show. I think the show is good. And it honestly, what's most disappointing about it is just that it has so much potential that it's not seemingly able to realize. It could have done so much more, I think, with two more episodes. 8 episodes of Dune Prophecy, I think, could have been masterful. As it is, it's good, but it has some significant problems as well. And here's hoping that episodes 5 and 6 are able to wrap up the show in a way that feels meaningful. But guys, what did you think of Dune Prophecy Episode 4? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Or are you off board with the show? Are you still on board with the show? Let me know in the comments down below. And are you excited for the last 2 episodes? Let me know in the comments down below.